What's going on, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of Trail Tales, or just straight up welcome. If this is your first time listening, I've got a feeling I'm going to have quite a few first time listeners this episode. So yeah, welcome and welcome back. My name is Kyle O'Grady. I am a thru-hiker. I thru-hiked the Appalachian Trail in 2018. I am a peak bagger. I'm almost done peak bagging the Northeast 115. I've just got a couple peaks left. And this is the podcast where I chat with other peak baggers and other thru-hikers and other hiking nerds just like myself every single week about their experiences on the trail. If that sounds interesting to you, I encourage you to go back, listen to some old episodes, and maybe hit that subscribe button. If you like what you hear, I would greatly appreciate that. Folks, this is a big episode. Philip Carcia is back on the program. The last time that we spoke, he was over halfway done the single year grid FKT attempt, but he still had a lot of hiking to go. I'm stoked to say now he has finished it. He has taken the fastest known time for the single year grid in the White Mountains, which is so amazing. In this episode, I pretty much just take a seat and I let Philip tell his story of the last couple months since we last spoke. In our last conversation, I kind of made a comment about how spring was coming, and I kind of implied that it was going to get a little bit easier, the hiking was, from then on out, and boy was I wrong. He still went through a ton of stuff since we last talked, and it was really amazing to hear about all of that. I mean, it should go without saying that this is something that's incredibly difficult. I mean, it's never been done as fast as he did it, obviously, but like, holy shit, hearing it from the source like this in a long format, it was such a pleasure. I had so much fun with this one. And Philip, dude, when you hear this, I've thanked you like 100 times over the months, but I gotta do it one more time for everybody to hear. Thank you so much, dude, and congratulations on an incredible accomplishment. This is going to be a good one, folks. We're going to get into the conversation in just a second, but first, I just want to say real quick, I got two things. If you like this episode, I would really appreciate it if you could share it on social media, throw it up in those Facebook groups, throw it on Instagram, get it out there to people. Let's get Philip's story out there. It's so incredible. I would really appreciate that. Go look up Trail Tales on Facebook. Just type in Trail Tales. It should come up. I'm also on Instagram at TrailTalesPod, and email is a thing as well, trailtalespod@gmail.com. Let me know what you think of the show. Let me know if you have any suggestions for guests or trails you want me to cover, any advice at all. I love getting emails. That would be really cool. My personal Instagram, I haven't plugged this in probably 5 months, at Kyle Hates Hiking. If you want to go follow me for some reason as well, you can do that. Please go check that stuff out. That would be super cool. The last thing I want to say real quick here is I know a lot of people listening to this are probably, up to date on the Whites, and maybe they haven't hiked in the Adirondacks quite as much, but I just want to turn my attention over there for a second and talk about an organization called 46 Climbs. It's an organization founded by a good friend of mine named Colby Ziemendorf. They raise money for the American Foundation for Suicide Prevention. I started a Trail Tales team for 46 Climbs, and I'm trying to raise as much money for this great cause as I possibly can. So maybe go check that out. It's 46climbs.com. You'll be able to register. You're going to pick a mountain, and then during the week of August 30th through September 8th, any day during that week, you're going to go hike that mountain. You're going to wear the shirt and all the other stuff that 46 Climbs send you after you register, and we're gonna go and turn something so negative into something positive and have a lot of fun while we're doing it. I would really appreciate it if you guys check this out, and again, make sure you sign up under the Trail Tales team so we can kind of pool our money together. That would be really cool. 46climbs.com. I'll also have a link to it in the show notes. Thank you so much for considering that. All right, let's do it. Episode 37 with Philip Carcia, White Mountain single year grid FKT holder. Episode 37 of Trail Tales. Here we go. Philip Carcia is back on the show. round 2. Philip was probably the most requested guest I've ever had. I put out a poll a couple weeks ago on my Instagram story, as I often do, asking for guest suggestions, because that's how I find a lot of people for this show. And despite the fact that he had already done an episode, he was by far the most requested guest that I got. And little did all those people know we were already way ahead of him in planning this. So here we are, round 2. Philip Carcia, dude, thank you so much for taking the time today. How's your weekend going so far?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Weekend is going real well. A little bit of work, a little bit of rest. That's kind of been the name of the game since I
was going to say.
since I finished this this monumental project 2 weeks ago this morning, actually, the single year grid. Yeah, it's been a wild ride, man. It's been awesome.
For sure. And we're going to talk all about it today. I can't wait to hear about it. And I'm sure everybody else is just as, maybe not quite as stoked as I am, but because I am just very stoked. But I'm sure everybody is pretty stoked.
Nobody is stoked as me, man. I'll tell you that right now.
I can definitely get behind that. I think that's definitely true. For everybody listening, if you have not listened to our first episode, I highly recommend you go do that. Not just because Mr. Trail Tales podcast guy wants to get more listens, but because a lot of what we're going to talk about today is going to kind of be building off of that. I guess this is going to be like a part 2. So if you're not really familiar with Philip's project and what he just accomplished, and some of the stuff we might talk about today could be a little bit confusing, so definitely go back and listen to that episode. It's number 24. It's on all the podcast platforms. Obviously, you know how to find it if you're listening to this. So yeah, that'll just give you some context, and it's also just a great episode too. I think Philip really kind of put it all out there in that one, and I think this is going to make like a good addition to that. So definitely go do that. That being said, why don't we just give like a real brief recap, I guess, kind of where we left off last time, Philip. Why don't you just explain a little bit why you're here, first of all, and a little bit about you, about your hiking background, and then what this single year grid crazy fucking thing is.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I think the last time we spoke, or the last podcast was recorded the first week of April.
April, yeah.
So it was very much, it still very much felt like winter up here in the White Mountains. And I was turning the corner on a nearly year-long project called the Single Year Grid in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. And this is a project that required climbing all 48 4,000 footers in the White Mountains in every month consecutively for 12 months. I was attempting to do it in record time. I did end up completing the project, like I said, 2 weeks ago today. So the project was sent in 319 elapsed days, so just slightly over 10 and a half months. And yeah, in April, me sitting down here and being able to tell you that I completed the project felt like a distant dream. Still, having come that far over that many months, it still felt slightly out of reach, slightly out of touch. And, I had the reassurance of many months of the project behind me, but I still wasn't quite sure that I was going to be able to see it all the way through, just because we had such a ridiculous winter. So in terms of the last time we talked, I mean, like I said, I was really turning the corner on this project. And I think one of the last subjects we kind of touched upon in that episode was just this idea that spring was coming, and that perhaps the days were going to get a little bit longer, a little bit easier. The weather would start to turn more in my favor, and I was kind of reluctant to believe in
I was
those.
Going to say, because I made that comment, which looking back on it now, a little bit foolish. I was like, oh, spring is coming, like it should get easier. If you made it this far, you could make it all the way, right? And you kind of shot that down. You were like, yeah, but keep in mind, these are still the hardest mountains on the East Coast, arguably elsewhere as well. And even during the middle of the summer on a beautiful day, they're still hard as fuck. So
so I talked to you in the beginning of April, and that was just about just about 4 months remaining in the project. So I had all of April, all of May, all of June. And then, of course, I finished the last round July and in the first 7 days of July. But I still had, nearly a third of the project in front of me, nearly 1,000 miles of hiking in front of me. And looking back on it now, I mean, truly, between just, let's even say April and June, the 3 last quote unquote regular months, I mean, it felt like I went through 3 or 4 lifetimes worth of experiences. I mean, I think the week that I talked to you on the podcast, I was talking about getting several inches of snow. I mean,
yes.
The winter.
Yes, I remember that. And then we did it too.
We did. And the winter weather didn't really loosen its grip on the White Mountains until I would say sometime in early May. So we weren't like really getting any kind of substantial snowstorms. We weren't getting any accumulation that was really building on the pack that we already had, but we were getting consistently cold temperatures. We would get, a little bit of precipitation, a dusting, an inch here, an inch or two there, and that just prevented the snowpack from really starting to melt and to move out of there. And so I was on solid snow until halfway through May.
Damn.
And I believe the very first snow-free hike that I went on, or the first hike that I would, in my mind consider snow-free, where it was like I was only just, on a few patches, maybe 50 feet long here and there, was right at the end of May. I think the 3rd week in May. I was just finishing up the month of May, or getting toward the end of the month of May. And it was the Whiteface Passaconaway Loop, third week-ish in May, and it was like the first time that, again, I didn't really hit much snow. I didn't have to carry spikes. It was a beautiful spring day, and when you think about that, I mean, late May, that's pretty late into the season to first be getting off snow, and at the same time, if you were to go further north, that particular range, the Sandwich Range, is more southern. Southerly located in the White Mountains. If you were to go further north, if you were to go into the Carta Maria Range, a couple other places, I mean, these areas still had substantial snow around that time. So, I mean, the days were getting longer and the temperatures were getting warmer almost everywhere else, but I was continuing through these insane winter-like conditions, still up several feet off the trail itself, still several feet up into this canopy of trees and canopy of branches. And it was just relentless, man. All the way through, it was relentless. And then, just to kind of add on that idea, once the snow did melt, once the temperatures, at 4,000 feet and above did actually warm up enough to start melting the snow, that just created a whole other scenario of different challenges and different experiences that I was having that would effectively make the hiking more difficult, more harder, more treacherous.
Why don't we talk about that a little bit? I'm guessing you're talking about like river crossings.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, talking about quality of the snow.
And the mud and stuff too.
Yeah, and mud and river crossings for sure. So first and foremost, I mean, picture this, right? So it's cold all the way through March, all the way through, let's say, April, where there isn't a lot of snow melting in the high country. And then all of a sudden the temperatures rebound, they get more seasonal, and you have, 4, 5, 6 feet of snow just sitting there, starting to melt all at once.
Yeah.
And the quality of the snow really starts to deteriorate. So what I was experiencing was, specifically at the end of April and throughout May, I would get out on the trail. I would get to elevation where there was the most snow. And basically, the quality of the snow was so poor that even in snowshoes, I was breaking through the monorail. So the thin, packed rail of snow that kind of lingers after all the surrounding snow melts. I would break through the monorail, and I would break through, and I would sink up to any number of feet into the snowpack, depending on where I was and how deteriorated the snow was. I mean, I could sink into my shins. I could sink into my knees. I could sink into my hips. I mean, it was just absolutely insane. And you can kind of imagine how that would stop you from really moving forward and, really being able to get any place quick.
Of course.
It was just ridiculously slow going and ridiculously taxing. And then, of course, that snow is rotten, and those conditions in the snow, with the snowpack are so poor for a reason, because the snow is melting and it's losing its stability, and all of that melt is going somewhere. And so, yes, when you mention, the river crossings, I mean, some of these crossings were just like insane, and not in the sense where it's like I felt like I was going to be swept away, although on some occasions, I mean, the water was absolutely waist high, and you did have to use your weight and your trekking poles to move across without going in. But it was just so cold and so consistent.
Literally just melted snow, just trying to wash you away.
Every possible river and stream and puddle and pool were filled and flowing. And I mean, that has like a trickle down effect, right? I mean, like, especially in those early season conditions, early spring conditions in the morning, it's pretty chilly out. And it's like you get into this water and, it cools your body temperature down quite a bit, even if it's only up to your knees, even if it's only up to your hips. It's like you start getting colder, and you start to lose that body heat that you've generated. And also it's like to walk for, in some cases, just personally speaking, to walk for 6 to 12 to 18 hours with super, super wet feet. I mean, it just like,
it's miserable.
It's miserable, and it shreds your feet apart. Totally destroys your feet. And whereas like my schedule dictated that I had to be out every single day, after weeks and weeks of this, it was getting pretty grim. The foot situation is still recovering. I'm sad to say.
I kind of want to see a picture of your feet, but I kind of don't. Put that up on the episode thumbnail, maybe. That'd be a good way to turn people off, I think.
I think thumbnail's the wrong word, man. Because there are very few nails left on my feet right now, but. Listen, Kyle, if you need some content, man, if you need some real raw foot related content, I can definitely get you a couple pictures of my feet post Direttissima.
I cannot even imagine. That's so gnarly. Honestly, you can. I kind of do want to. I'll just like peek for a second, just.
I'll send you a couple pictures, man, and what happens from there, that'll be up to you.
No one will have to know.
Exactly.
What are some of the gnarliest river crossings that you've had to do in the Whites?
Oh, well, to be honest with you, the only river that I had to kind of turn around from was the Little River, and this was heading up a mountain called North Twin Mountain.
Yeah. So were you leaving from like the 302 kind of side?
I was leaving from the Route 3 side, and I was going up a road called Haystack Road.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So I'm just trying to. I should have grabbed my map, honestly. But yeah, I just wanted to get. I wasn't sure if you were coming from the Pemi Loop side or the other side. But
nope.
Because I remember that river crossing too when I did it. So
yeah, it's serious, and I didn't realize how serious it was going to be. I just didn't realize how high the river was, and that whole area back there going up to North Twin from the Route 3 side is just super choppy. There's all these blowdowns, there's all these odd crossings and non-crossings. It's just a little confusing, and I haven't frequented that area much on this project, but I believe it was the April round,
which would make sense. Spring.
Yeah, a very, very last week of April, I needed North Twin, I needed South Twin, I needed Garfield, and I needed Galehead. And for some reason, I felt like going up North Twin and working my way across was a better option than going up Garfield and working my way the opposite direction. Looking back, that was a little ridiculous, but I figured I'd cross the Little River early. When it was at its lowest, and there had been a lot of precipitation in the recent days leading up to that hike. But yeah, man, I walked the road about 2.5 miles, got on the North Twin Trail, headed up to North Twin, and crossed the river once. Got really, really wet. I was up to my waist. It was very cold. The woods were still in those early morning shadows. There wasn't any direct sunlight. There was just like a very, very, very cold temperature to the air, and crossed the Little River once up to my waist and got very, very chilly and got a little bit off trail in some down vegetation and came to what I thought was a second crossing and stepped like maybe 2 or 3 feet in. And I was like, number one, I'm way too cold to be crossing this river right now.
Yeah.
And number two, like this river is raging pretty hard. And I know that I could have crossed it, but the idea of having to continue on and then turn back and go back across two crossings was just like, you know what? I haven't had to call too many hikes this year, and I've been really fortunate in that regard. And I was by myself. I was just like, this doesn't feel right. And it was the last week of the month, and my wiggle room was diminishing, but I still had a little bit of room to kind of make a decision like that, where I didn't have to force myself into something that could have developed into a bigger scenario. So, yeah, man, I mean, that was very indicative of what the worst crossings were like. I didn't have to turn around anywhere else, but yeah, it was a very, very wet spring, and even wet early summer. The weather didn't quite stabilize until early June, to be honest with you.
Yeah, and thank God it did eventually. Can I ask you kind of a tough question?
Yeah.
Maybe make you think a little bit. So
okay.
In our last episode, we talked a little bit about how you came down to, the last couple days of the month a couple times, to finish that month. And I kind of want to raise a hypothetical situation going back to what you just said a second ago. Mm-hmm. If you had been, I think you probably know where I'm going with this. If you had been on like the last day or the second to last day, I know you said you didn't have that much wiggle room, but you had a little bit. Mm-hmm. And you had encountered that situation where you were really questioning whether or not you could have gone forward, whether or not it would have been a smart, safe decision to go forward. Mm-hmm. What do you think you would have done?
It's pretty easy to answer that, and I feel like I can answer it pretty unapologetically. Okay. I mean, when I decided to turn around, it was not a decision that was made at a breaking point. I hadn't just submerged myself in water. I hadn't been hypothermic. I hadn't, pushed myself way beyond my means or my own personal capacity. And the reason why I turned around is because I was trying to avoid all that. Mm-hmm. And it wasn't a given that I would have gotten there if I'd gone through the river and gotten even more wet. I was just trying to avoid a worst case scenario. And the reason why I felt like I could turn around also was because, again, I was not 100% up against the wall. I still had that wiggle room. Mm-hmm. And it was like, I'm just not willing to put myself in that position if there's wiggle room that could potentially lead to a more safe scenario. Now, let's say we're on the last day of the month, which I have been in that position several times over the course of this project. And I was in that position, I think, 1 or 2 more times after we last spoke.
Okay, interesting.
After I kind of swore that I would never let that happen again.
Hey, it's a crazy project, man. It's going to happen.
I just, like, at a certain point, man, I just accepted it for what it was. But, let's say that I was heading up North Twin. Let's say that I was heading up North Twin on the last day of the month, and I was facing that same scenario, and I was looking at the river crossing, and I was already a little chilly, and it was a raw morning, and I still had many miles in front of me, but my back was up against the wall. Like, yes, absolutely, I would have crossed the river. Do I think it would have been a game-changing decision? Like, I don't think.
I mean, you even said it yourself. You probably could have done it. It was just a matter of, is it the best decision possible when I have some wiggle room,
Exactly. And to be 100% real with you, like, since that day, on probably 1 or 2, possibly even 3 occasions, if you count the Direttissima, like, I was in scenarios that were like way, way, way more desperate than that. You know what I mean? And I just I pushed through them. So, yeah, man, if I had to go back and it was like, do or die type of scenario, then like, yes, I would have gone through, but that is the exact scenario that I was trying to avoid.
Yes.
If that makes sense.
That makes total sense. And I think that's a good way to put it. Why don't we talk about this final round, the Direttissima, which I could not pronounce in our last episode, but I'm getting it now.
Yes, you are.
So just briefly again, why don't you just explain what it is real quick? And yeah, sure. Dude, like, I feel like I don't even want to ask any specific questions. Like, I just want to hear about this like crazy fucking thing. Let's talk about July.
Oh man, July. The White Mountain Direttissima. You know, in my opinion, the hardest long distance route on the East Coast. Easily the hardest long distance route on the East Coast. Right here in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. Yeah, I use the Direttissima, or let's just to give the audience a little bit of context
Sure.
anybody who's unfamiliar. The Direttissima is a through hike of the 48 4,000 footers in the White Mountains, essentially. So it is a 230 to 240 mile route that connects all 48 4,000 footers in the White Mountains. You're going to go, as I said, about 230 to 240 miles. You're going to climb about 80,000 feet of vertical, and you're going to summit all 48 4,000 footers in one continuous trip. So very, very small group of people have their names on the Direttissima. So there's been 12 finishers in total. The last time we spoke, there had only been 10. Since then, two additional people, to the best of my knowledge, have finished the Direttissima route, or finished a route that they identify as the White Mountain Direttissima. And yeah, I kind of see this as being the most difficult way to hike the 48 4,000 footers in New Hampshire. And again, I see this as one of the most difficult long distance hiking, running, backpacking routes on the East Coast. And, just in terms of the tone that I wanted to set for my project, I use the Direttissima as bookends. So the very first round was in the form of a White Mountain Direttissima. I did that in a mostly unsupported fashion in a time of 8 days, 8 hours. And the last round was in the form of a White Mountain Direttissima. I did that in a supported fashion in a time of 6 days, 18 hours. And
Jesus.
Yeah. And that last round in July, the last round of the single year grid, was definitely the hardest hiking I've ever done. I would say arguably that was the single most difficult mountain-based experience I've had, and that's coming from somebody who's through hiked the AT, the PCT, the Long Trail, Colorado Trail, been to Alaska twice, JMT, Tahoe Rim, like all this, like the White Mountain Direttissima, traveling the way that we did, at the pace that we did, at the tail end of an 11-month epic, mountain-based project, was by far like the single most difficult thing I've ever.
So insane, dude. I remember seeing your Instagram story, and like, you periodically do the live streams or whatever for a few minutes, and like I would occasionally kind of tune into them or watch them after the fact, and you were always in a pretty good mood, feeling good, just kind of pretty chipper. And this one, during the final Direttissima, completely different story, dude. I don't remember exactly what you said, but like you sounded and looked like you were absolutely drained. Yes, and I can't remember, you probably remember better than I would, obviously. I can't remember exactly how far in you were, but I know it wasn't like super close to the end yet. I think it might have been like towards the middle, kind of. You probably did that a couple times, the live thing, but like, dude, tell me about just like physically, mentally, like how did you make this happen?
Yes. Well, let me say first and foremost that you're certainly not the first person that has come up to me after this experience, after the Direttissima, and said like, homie, I don't know who you were out there, but you were somebody else, and we didn't really recognize him.
Oh my God.
So I mean, I almost accept that as a sort of like badge of honor. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And you know what? I'll also add, that is the exact experience that I wanted to get out of the single year grid, out of the Direttissima. That's why I chose the Direttissima as two bookends to this project, beginning and an end, because it just takes everything from you. And my whole story, my whole thing, this whole time being up here has never changed. Like, I'm a no-name hiker from central Massachusetts who's been coming to the White Mountains for 17 years. And on this particular occasion, on this particular time in the Whites, I wanted to throw down on the biggest, the single biggest mountain-based project in the White Mountains and possibly in the Northeast. And I knew that I wanted to give myself fully. I knew that I wanted to give every ounce of myself to that experience. So when people say, dude, listen, I don't really know who you were out there, or you didn't look like yourself, or you look totally wasted. There's a part of me that's like, oh man, you were pushing really hard. You're really on the extreme end of it, on the extreme end there. And then there's also a part of me that's like, good.
Yeah.
That's exactly what I wanted. That means that I was really doing my job, because I didn't feel like myself. I felt very different. So yes, the 6th round. So for anybody who listened to the podcast previously, or who listened to my episode, or who has kind of been following the single year grid, that I'm trying to, or was trying to, finish the grid in the shortest time possible. And so I needed to throw down on a very fast round of all 48 the last week or so of August, and I needed to throw down on a very fast round of the 48 the first week of July, because those are the only 2 months on the project where you have any control over the total elapsed time of how long you're out there actually whittling away, hiking these 576 peaks. And so with that in mind, as soon as July 1st hit, it is in my best interest to, I think I kind of said this in the last podcast, it was in my best interest to be at the starting line, to be at the trailhead at midnight, ready to go, because you're not going to wait, 4, 5, 6 hours, sleep through the night, to get started the next day. You got to start moving right off the bat. It's kind of a forced midnight start on the first day of July.
Yeah.
And so as I kind of spelled out in the last episode, at 12 o'clock midnight, on July 1st, myself and my team were gathered at the trailhead for Mount Cabot, out in the middle of nowhere in the White Mountain National Forest, looking at our watches, counting down the seconds, and yeah, as soon as the clock hit midnight, we were off. And
damn, did anybody take any pictures or video of that moment?
we there were a couple guests from the hostel, my friend John and my friend Ginger. Big shout out to those guys. They went up to the summit of Cabot many hours earlier and were waiting our arrival. So there's a couple pictures of us on the summit, but the very cool thing is that we had a documentary filmmaker, a gentleman by the name of Alejandro, who was with us not the entire way, but he hiked over 100 miles on the Direttissima to meet up with us and get shots of us as we were kind of hiking and get insights. Nice. So yeah, there was a gentleman who was documenting the entire thing, and then we were taking a bunch of photos, of course, and then we'd come to these road crossings and people would be taking photos. But let me tell you something, man, on that note, this was not a happy-go-lucky photo taking, selfie taking kind of hike of the 48 and hike of the Direttissima. This was a balls to the wall. This was an ultra aggressive go at the Direttissima, and ultimately, I think for me personally, that ended up kind of biting me in the ass toward the end. But nevertheless, as soon as 12 o'clock hit, we were just straight savages. I mean, we in the first 26 hours, my partner Jason and myself, Jason Lance, who's an ultra marathon runner from Pennsylvania originally, he's now living in Whitefield, New Hampshire, super accomplished ultra marathon runner, cool, 100 miler, just a gentleman who's become a good friend over the last year. He and I left, and in the first 26 hours, I mean, we hiked close to 66 miles from the base of the Mount Cabot trailhead all the way to Glen Ellis, traversing Cabot, Wambeck, Mount Jefferson, Mount Adams, Mount Madison, and then doing a full Mariah Carter Cats traverse into the early morning hours.
Oh my God, that's so insane.
It was like 66 miles, like 21,000 feet of vertical right off the rip, and that was a pace that was way faster than I was planning on.
Okay.
I think if you were to talk to my boy Jason Lance, he would probably say that was about par with what he was trying to put in.
Yeah.
Just he's got incredible long distance legs, man, and he's run and won many 100-mile races.
Damn.
But, like I said, the tone right off the bat was just absolutely insane. And when we came into Glen Ellis in the early morning hours of July 2nd, I mean, we literally met our crew. We downed some food. We slipped into our tents and we slept for 2.5 hours, maybe 3 hours, got up. And I mean, by 7 o'clock, we were hiking up Glen Ellis toward the presidential range, but ultimately we would go out to isolation before going up to Mount Washington and going down the Southerns. But that just gives you an idea, man. I mean, that kind of pace, I mean, we tried to sustain that only with much less sleep over the course of the first few days. And so that, that first 66-mile day was then met with a 45 or 46-mile day on the second day from the Glen Ellis parking lot just south of Pinkham Notch all the way to, we made it to Sawyer River Road at the base of Mount Kerrigan. And then we were able to sleep for another hour or two. But it was just a war of attrition. I mean, we were going as hard and as consistently as we could until we absolutely needed sleep. And we'd catch a couple winks just to like make it feel as though we were some degree of rested.
Yeah.
And then we would keep going. And it was insane, man. It was really, really, really tough. Like after that first day, walking the road over to Glen Ellis, coming off the Wildcats, like all that super, super steep country. I mean, it hit me then and there. This is going to be really, really tough, man.
Did you have to slow the pace down a little bit after that first day?
I mean, I'm just going to be real with everybody, man. Eventually my wheels totally came off. I mean, there was no way for me personally to answer a 66-mile day with another 66-mile day. Yeah. And of course, like the miles aren't all created equal out there.
Of course.
So, we got in another 45 miles that following day, so to speak, before we were able to sleep a little bit. And then we answered that with, I think, like a 35-mile day. And that got us all the way to Livermore Road right in Waterville Valley. And from there, I mean, like you think even though you're decreasing mileage every day, you feel like you're kind of getting into a little bit of a rhythm. And then just when you feel like you're getting into a little bit of a rhythm, you hit the hairpin turn and you're looking at about 55 miles of roadless Direttissima.
Yeah.
You don't cross another road in 55 miles. And so now you're going into this like backpacking / fast packing mode where you're carrying way more food, you're carrying way more weight. I had like a 16-ounce sleeping bag with me because I knew that I was going to need to I knew I was going to just somewhere, man. Yeah. And that became like the sleep deprivation just became such a governing portion of the back end.
See, that's what I remember you talking about a lot in that Instagram video I was referring to a few minutes ago. It's just like you're just not sleeping over the course of the Direttissima. Like how many hours of like not like just like laying there and shutting your eyes for a few minutes, but like how many hours of like actual like solid sleep do you think you got?
I kind of kept track of the sleep I was getting personally, which pretty much mirrored the sleep that Jason was getting. And even counting like those 15-minute, 20-minute cat naps, which there were a bunch of those, over the course of the 6 days, 18 hours, let's just call it 7 days. I mean, there's no way that I slept more than 10 hours total.
Jesus,
like that,
dude,
that would
so
actually,
nuts.
that would actually be generous. I would say actually it probably shook out to be closer to like 9, maybe 8.5, 9.
God. Dude, if I don't fucking sleep for 9 hours just in a normal day, I can like barely function. That's so insane.
Well, this was the component that I feared the most, man. I mean, I don't function well without sleep either. And I knew that like after 11 months of gritting the 48 every month, like all of my reserves were going to be lowered just right off the bat. So to then go and put myself in such a heavy sleep depth, I mean, I knew it was a recipe for very, very strange things to happen, and very, very strange things did happen. And I was, definitely, I mean, I could go on and on about what that Direttissima brought in terms of difficulty and challenges to the last round of the single year grid. But ultimately, there were new challenges around every corner, and these were challenges in terms of the terrain, in terms of the vertical, in terms of the bushwhacking that we needed to do, and these were challenges in terms of the sleep deprivation and just how hard we were pushing our bodies, and just the effect of having such little sleep. I mean, it just changed everything, man. It changed everything about the experience. And by the time I got to the basin, which is right in Franconia Notch, by the time, it got out of the Pemigewasset, my partner Jason was, I would say, about an hour in front of me.
Okay.
And was kind of getting to the point where it's like, if he didn't move on, he kind of felt like his body was going to seize up and not really allow him to move forward at all. And also, and I can tell you this just from personal experience, like witnessing Jason, and then also like taking into consideration what I was going through myself. Like Jason was hallucinating heavily, man. And we had like a 5-hour debrief the other night where we just got together and ate some pizza and drank some tequila and just like laughed our asses off about the whole experience and like,
man,
what we want to change and what we want to do the same. But ultimately, like Jason was telling me, when he got ahead of me, which was on Franconia Ridge in the early morning hours of, I guess, what was the 5th day, he told me that he was hallucinating that he was in a race and that the only person that he could identify in the race was me, but that he wasn't thinking it was me. Like in his mind, I was someone else. And as I'm kind of on Franconia Ridge, an hour behind him, I'm walking and just like caught in this tunnel of light that's being cast by my headlamp, and I'm watching these rocks in my peripheral go by my feet, and every single one of them start to have a face with eyes, and not like a human face, but just faces that are made from the divots and the textures and the rocks and the sand, and like I'm starting to have this like hallucination that these faces are looking at me and they can actually see through me and they actually know how much I'm struggling, and then I'm having this whole emotional battle where it's like I can't let them know how much I'm struggling because I don't want anybody to know that. And it's like this is the kind of insane shit that was going on in our brains as we're trying to just like crawl our way through the last let's say 40 miles of the Direttissima on at that point 7 hours of sleep over the course of 5 days. It was just insane.
Did you ever just like black out? Like, are there any peaks that you just like straight up have no like memory of, or like very vague memory of?
No, I remember every peak, man. There are definitely portions of the trip that have kind of like come back to me a little bit since finishing and since I've caught up on the sleep. And I know Jason had mentioned that the same thing was happening to him. But the interesting thing was, and this happened for the most part in the Pemigewasset. We got up to Bondcliff, we're looking at, another 40 miles to get to where we need to be, to get to the basin, to get to our crew. This is going to incorporate all of the Pemi, plus Hale, plus Owl's Head, 2 bushwhacks, just like a lot of heavy terrain in front of us. And we got up to Bondcliff and there was this like insanely beautiful sunset, and we knew the darkness was coming. And so we kind of allowed ourselves, I would say like 10 or 15 minutes of sleep at this point. Alton and Cole were with us. I know they were on your show. It was a sick episode.
Yeah.
Alton and Cole were like godsends during this entire process. Like we could do a whole episode based on what they did to help both Jason and I move forward with the Direttissima. But, they were up there with us as well. And we allowed ourselves 20 minutes of sleep. And what I thought was going to be just like a really lovely, rejuvenating kind of, slumber turned out to be the exact opposite. So like when I woke up from that, I just woke up with this sense of anxiety, because all I wanted was sleep. The last thing that I wanted to do was get back on my feet, get back on my torn ass feet. My skin that was blistering and coming off, that was the last thing I wanted. All I wanted to do was sleep. And there's a lot of stories about what happened in the Pemigewasset section of this Direttissima, but from that point forward, pretty much until the next morning, my brain got in this really strange, hypnotic headspace where the only thing that I could focus on, think about, was sleep. Like it was at the point where like we would branch off to do the westbound. We branched off to do the westbound out and back, and I didn't take my fucking backpack with me, but I took my sleeping bag, wrapped it around my shoulders, and got up to the summit like 30 seconds after Alton and Jason. And I said, guys, how long we got? 2 minutes. Literally just threw down in my sleeping bag right there and caught like a minute of like micro sleep. Like that was the only thing I could think about, man. It was so strange. Man. And that continued pretty much all the way until the next morning. And actually that kind of provided one of the coolest moments of the entire trip, because we came off West Bond and we were in the coal between West Bond and Guillote, and there was just this stretch of woods. And I looked at Jason and I looked at Alton and I said, guys, I'm so sorry, but the only way that I can move forward is if I get 60 minutes of sleep. And, I probably wasn't super nice about it. I was probably a little demanding. But it was honestly at the point where like, I just couldn't picture moving forward through the darkness without some semblance of rest.
Yeah.
And right there, man, in the middle of the night, Alton, Jason, Cole, and myself stepped about 2 or 3 feet off of the trail, found this nice soft patch of pine needles, and we all just like curled up next to one another, and we set an alarm and we slept for 90 minutes. And this really weird thing happened. Like I would say I shut my eyes and maybe like 60 seconds later, I had already fallen asleep. 60 seconds later, I like shoot up super violently out of my sleeping bag. And I look back at Jason and Alton and Cole, and they're all just looking at me. And I was like, is it time to go? Like I was just operating on this like extremely exhausted, but also kind of like anxiety induced, like heightened kind of like, we got to keep going, like mental state. And they're like, dude, it's been a minute. And, and I was like, wow. Holy shit. And like right before I went back to sleep, I took like this half second to appreciate the scene, which was Jason, Cole, Alton, and myself all huddled, off the shoulder of West Bond, like in this like, this like wolf-like pack kind of, mentality or mode. And it was just like, I don't know, man, it was both beautiful. It was both disturbing, but also, quite beautiful.
Yeah, awesome. For sure. And obviously you kept going. How about like the last, like, I don't even want to say like the last day, like the last X amount of hours, like when you're right at the end, like it's almost like in sight, you're almost there, but like you still have to continue to push yourself for a little while longer, just you're close enough to taste it, but you're not close enough to like fully bite it. How did that feel? How did you deal with that?
Well, I mean, there was like kind of a pretty big plot twist right within the last 30 miles of finishing. So like I said, Jason got down to the basin in Franconia Notch about an hour in front of me, and he was just like so out of it and just so mentally beat and physically beat. And ultimately, in the moment on the spot, my homie decided that he needed to move on. And so he left the basin aid station, so to speak. I would say probably, like I said, an hour and 15 minutes before I got down there. And I had caught word that he was going to head out as I was coming down to the basin. So it wasn't a surprise or anything. And as I got to the basin, like, all my homies, Alton, Chris, all these guys kind of rallied and started to, inquire, who can hike with Phil, who can link up with him from here and get him over to 112, and then who wants to hike Moosilauke to finish the whole thing. They were like really good about getting me back up. But when I got down to the basin, like my family was there, my mom, my brother, my sister, 2 of my oldest homies from back in Massachusetts. And it just like hit me like, you know what? Jason's ahead of me. He's probably equally as fucked up, but he's just on his straight up grind. And he's going to take the FKT, for the Direttissima, because ultimately we were trying to get in underneath the fastest known time for the Direttissima as well. And it just felt right for me to chill there and get 2 hours of sleep and give my mom a hug and give my homies a hug and really just kind of lay off the gas a little bit. And, you know, it was what it was. I mean, it felt okay. And it was all knowing that, like, you know, this much, much bigger goal was coming to a close. The single year grid was about to get sent, and like being 30 miles out, you know, 4 peaks and 30 miles out from the end of this year-long project. It was like, you know, Jason's my homie, but I was like, you know, if this man wants to go and just crush it, I support that. I love that dude. But I'm going to just like chill here for a second and vibe and not like, you know, not rush through the last little bit too much. So I took a couple hours sleep there and got going, on that last full day. Hit the worst weather of the trip on that last full day.
Really? Of course, naturally on the last day.
Absolutely. Ended up going up Mount Cannon in a super violent thunder and lightning storm, big, heavy downpours. Ended up running into Andrew Drummond. Shout out to Ski the Whites, big White Mountain legend, also a Direttissima finisher. Ended up running into him and his pup Squall, getting close to the summit of Cannon. Ended up running into another gentleman who I'd never met before, a gentleman by the name of Bill Tidd, who was on his own unsupported Direttissima, looking strong as fuck out there. So like that totally hyped my morale up, running into those boys and getting a little bit of love and showing a little bit of love to those boys. But after that, man, again, I was just hurting and my wheels had come off at that point heavy. And the last, let's just say 20 miles from, Cannon up over the Kinsmans, and then from Kinsman out to 112 and up Moosilauke. I mean, it was just slow going, dude. It was really slow going. And walking through the night that last day, I mean, I had my buddy Jason Gray out with me, from Worcester, who's a super talented runner. He came out and helped get me in. I had my buddy Rich Gamble, who's just a very prolific peak bagger in the White Mountains, had him come out and help. Had my buddy Kyle come out and help me. And by help, I mean just like walk with me, dude, like through the night, because I just could not
keep you walking straight.
Yeah, man. And like even on that last few miles, those last few miles down to the road, I mean, like I was asking for like 10 minutes of sleep here or there. Wow. And I was falling asleep, dude, for like 10 whole minutes as soon as I hit the ground, and it was wet and it was muddy, and I was just like slurping around in a rain poncho, but I was like getting that sleep because I needed it. And I'll just paint the picture of like the last few moments.
Yes, dude, that's exactly what I need to hear, because I'm torn, because obviously I can't relate to this, but it's like hearing about all of this like hardship that you went through just on the Direttissima. It's like, I don't know if I would be most excited just to have that done by the time I summit Moosilauke, or if, I would still be able to kind of take some time and soak in, finishing the single year grid,
Yeah. Well, I'll tell you right now, just as a preface, when I was on the Direttissima, pretty much up until the last day, I didn't think about the single year grid once.
Really?
Like, it was just lost on me that I was finishing this much bigger goal. And it would come, it would, the last day or so there, it would kind of float in and out like, yo, you're about to finish this thing. Like, yeah. You're about to throw down on something. But ultimately the task at hand, finishing the Direttissima, finishing that last round as quickly as possible, always overshadowed the single year grid, just in that week that I was out there, because it seemed like, yeah, the goal was one and the same: get to Moosilauke. That would finish the Direttissima. That would finish the single year grid. But the Direttissima was just so much more on the front burner. That was the term that was being thrown out. That's how I was finishing the single year grid.
Yeah.
So it didn't really start to hit me that I was finishing the single year until I came down into the Beaverbrook parking lot, which is the last road crossing. You're 4 miles from the summit of Mount Moosilauke.
4 very steep miles, I'll
say.
Super
steep miles, yes. And I probably came into that parking lot around 3 a.m, and maybe 50 yards from the parking lot, we're walking along in silence, myself, my buddy Rich, my buddy Kyle, my buddy Jason. And all of a sudden, I hear the most like unbelievable wolf howl. And it isn't like one person, it's several people, if not more.
Oh, wow.
And I was just like, am I fucked up right now? Like, what, like, am I like, is this part of the hallucination here? Because at that point, it was like, I don't know, man, very hard to explain, but I was very sleep deprived. And then all of a sudden, my homies that were with me start howling back. And then I hear more howls, and I'm like, oh my God, these are friends of mine that are waiting, down in the parking lot. And so I get down to the parking lot, and just like a very eclectic group of people show up. So again, you've got my buddy Jason, you've got my buddy Rich. You've got my buddy Jason, you've got my buddy Rich, you've got my buddy Kyle that are walking with me. And then we see a bunch of guests from the hostel. And then I see one of my oldest homies, Dave. And then I see my brother, and I see my sister-in-law, Sarah, and my friend Laura, and all of these people. And I'm just like, oh man, like all these people are here for me. And like I said, I had been walking through like storms that very last day. There was kind of a moment where we were like, are we going up right now? Like, are we going up to Moose? Like, are we just going to keep this train rolling? Or do we take a couple hours and just finish leisurely the next day?
Yeah.
And I remember a buddy of mine, Dan McGinnis, who's just, got his own rep up here in the White Mountains, has thrown down on just some killer projects in the past. He kind of appears, and I had seen him in the Pemigewasset like 2 days earlier randomly.
Okay.
He gave me just a big bottle of Gatorade. It was a super sick moment. He appears with like all these pizzas, and I'm like, oh dude, game over. Like, I'm going to stay here. I'm going to eat. I'm going to wait for this.
That's not a tough choice.
Yeah, I'm going to wait for this weather to pass. And tomorrow morning, we're going to leave here leisurely at 8 or 9 o'clock. We're going to have a lovely day up there, and we're going to finish this thing right. And I was a little, it was just ever so slightly deflating, because it felt like the crazy ass momentum to the Direttissima had now officially ended. And I'm just kind of, I slept for 3 hours that night. Just kind of biding my time, waiting to go out. But ultimately, I think it was the right decision, because around 9 o'clock on Sunday, the 7th of July, I think probably 10 or 12 of us, Dan McGinnis and also Hiker Ed, Ed Hawkins is this is an old head of the White Mountains. He's just, he's one of the original. Hiker Ed is one of the original hikers out here. He's just an old head of the White Mountains. His license plate reads 5,000 4Ks. And that's some real shit. And he'll be the first person to tell you that those numbers are outdated. You know what I mean? Like, he's just an old school dude out here, in his 70s, still getting after it. And also oversees the whole kind of grid culture and grid organization. Okay. And he's the one that reviews the applications and the dates that you submit and gives the patch. He was there, and man, we all climbed Mount Moosilauke on a beautiful bluebird day with 100-mile views. At the end of the first week in July, and I was hurting heavily on the climb up to that peak. Everybody in the crew got in front of me, and also I was just trying to enjoy that those last few miles
as
of
much
what
as you
was,
can.
yeah, man, just of what was such a monumental project. And the finish was the perfect mix of like enthusiasm from friends, that the 10 or the 12 people who were up there who actually knew what I was doing, who actually knew what I had just finished. And then also just a healthy dose of stranger driven, apathy or lackluster. There's just like a bunch of other people up there looking at me like, who the fuck does this dude think he is? Like, dude, what do you got going on? Like, that's so special, And I appreciate both of those sides, because that's very much the way it is, right? Like, when you finish any big through hike or project, it's like, what you did and your team knows what you did, but you look at the outside world, and even with all the social media and all the love that came along with this project, it's like, most people don't really know and they don't really give a shit. And I think that's fucking awesome. You know, I really appreciate that side of it too. But all that being said, I mean, 2 weeks out now, I know it's going to take many, many weeks and many, many months and maybe even a few years to really come to terms with and process what I was able to pull off out there. And there's a part of me that feels like, yes, I know that the grid is over. I know that I completed the project. I know that there's no longer a need for this super aggressive schedule in the mountains. Mm-hmm. But at the same rate, I also feel like going out with such consistency over the last 11 months really turned climbing all 48 4,000 footers every month into just more of a unbelievably wild life practice.
Yeah.
And
for sure.
So like, yeah, the project is over, but I know that I'm going to be getting out with a ton of consistency real soon. And so it feels like the project is done, but it also feels like life is just continuing on the way that it always has. Like there's like this new world out there, you know, the world, life feels both very familiar and dramatically different at the same time.
So I think that's a good point to kind of transition a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about post-grid life. So like you said, it was about 2 weeks ago that you finished, which is, first of all, it's fucking insane that you were willing to come on here like so soon after, dude. I really appreciate that.
Oh, dude, I was ready to go like the first week, man. I just said I didn't want to rush you, but no, this is great. This is
awesome.
Great.
Yeah, I genuinely really appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, post-grid. So you finish Moose Lock, you get back down to the parking lot, and you know, you sleep. You gotta go sleep, right? Like, I don't know, what does that first like couple days afterwards look like? You know, both what are you doing besides sleep, if anything? And you know, just are you able to start processing it yet, or are you really just trying to catch up and rest? You know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. I mean, ultimately, as soon as I finished the Direttissima, I came back to the Notch. I smashed a Smitty burger from Black Mountain Burger here in town, which is like a half-pound burger with a full grilled cheese sandwich for the top bun and a full grilled cheese sandwich for the bottom bun.
Damn. I wish I had known about that when I was going through Lincoln.
Yeah, man. Add bacon, add mayo, no veggies, like onion rings on the side. It's pretty next level.
thru-hikers, make note.
Real talk. You guys got to hit up Black Mountain when you come through. It's absolutely next level. I would love a Black Mountain Burger Company sponsorship in the future if you guys are listening. No, but yeah, I grabbed just a big burger, and I'm being straight up with you, man. I did nothing but sleep for close to 5 days.
Which I see. That's what in the back of my head when I was asking that question, I was like, you know, is this even worth asking? Because I feel like that's probably all he would have done. But I don't know. I did nothing but sleep for 5 days, and this was punctuated with brief periods of consciousness, and during those periods I was usually trying to consume as much food as I could, but I was super wasted, man. And it was both the sleep deprivation and the pace of the Direttissima coupled with just 11 months of non-stop White Mountain gritting. Like, I can't drill that point in enough because even I forget about it sometimes. I'm like, well, why am I still feeling so depleted when from the Direttissima? Even like before we did this interview, I was just kind of feeling very just tired and worn out. It's like the beginning of the day out here, you know? And I'm like, why am I still so tired from the Direttissima? And it's like, well, I don't think you are tired, or I don't think I am tired from the Direttissima. I think I'm tired from the Direttissima in combination with 10 or 11 straight monthly rounds of gritting the White Mountain 48. So when I finished that, man, I was super, super depleted. I ate a bunch of food. I crawled into my bed and I slept for 3, 4, 5 days. I ended up missing 2 shifts at work.
like my boss, Serena, like, you know, love her to death. She just, you know, the very first shift that I was scheduled back, she was like, "You're not coming into work tomorrow." And I was like, "Okay, I'll take that." And I hesitate to take that so freely just because they do so much for me here in the Notch Hostel, is just like help facilitate this dream on a daily basis since I started.
Yeah, really huge shout out to the Notch, man. Like,
I mean, if we're giving shout outs, man, shout out to Serena and the Notch Hostel, because
they were super good to me for the very brief amount of time I was there.
Oh yeah. Well, and I thought I was going to be living out of the back of my truck for this project, man. And ultimately this woman, Serena, you know, it took me in for an interview and heard me plead my case. You know, took me in for an interview, heard me plead my case, asked me to show her how I was going to try to pull this off. And once I gave her, you know, reason to believe, she believed 1,000% from the second I walked in there until the second she met me at the bridge, you know, at the Ravine Lodge, you know, finishing the last round. I mean, it was insane, man. I want to make it very clear. I could not have completed the single year grid without the Notch Hostel's help and without Serena's help. So yeah, absolutely. Shout out to the Notch Hostel. But
for sure.
Yeah, man, she gave me the first day off. And then the second day that I was scheduled, I was literally just like awake, but like kind of slumped over at the front desk when she walked in at 4. And I was like, "What are you doing here?" And she's like, "What are you doing here?" And I'm like, I'm on the schedule. And she's like, "I didn't think you'd be in." And I was like, "Well, I wasn't going to just like not show up to the shift." And she's like, "How do you feel?" And I was just like, had to just be super honest with her. I was like, "I could definitely use another day." And she's like, "Dude, go take another day, man."
So awesome.
Yeah. So she let me split, and I did nothing but sleep for 5 days, man. And I would ice my feet. I would tend to my blisters. I would, you know, take Epsom salt baths. I would do everything I could to try to appease some of the, you know, the trauma that I had put my body through. But it was definitely rough, man, that first week. I mean, I didn't even talk to my friends or family until maybe like 7 or 8 days after the Direttissima, man, because I was just so rocked. I truly woke up every morning feeling like I could go right back to sleep immediately and be fine with it. And that's what I did. And it was just the acknowledgement that I had finally done what I'd wanted to do the entire single year grid, which is give myself fully to the point where I absolutely had nothing. And yeah, just the process of acknowledging that, you know, waking up, enjoying that it had been sent, that the project had been finished, and then going back to sleep. And of course, you know, things have gotten a lot better, you know, since then over the course of the last 14 days. I mean, I've definitely gotten my energy back, and I've been just, you know, really starting the long road of looking at images, looking at videos, processing things. You know, literally, you know, processing images, processing video, getting stuff together, doing, you know, podcasts with you, giving interviews to other outlets that have taken some interest. But I mean, life is just going to be very kind of slow to start back up, I think. I mean, I'm going to be working about 30 hours at the hostel per week, and still going to be based, you know, at the Notch in the White Mountains. And, you know, just going to kind of like take a little bit of time here to just let the body recoup, let the mind recoup. And I'm not forcing anything, man. Like, you know, like you ask about processing or digesting the experience. Like, I've done stuff like this enough at this point in my life where I know that the processing and the digesting does not happen overnight. It doesn't happen in a week or a month. Like, these things come in waves and in cycles. And I mean, just I'm honestly still digesting the simple fact that I pulled this off.
Yeah, man.
I mean, like, I was driving around the hairpin turn the other day, maybe like yesterday or the day before. You know, just like listening to some music on a drive back into Lincoln, and you know, that was an area that I crossed on the Direttissima, and just like all of a sudden, like this heavy wave of elation just came over me, and it was just like, holy shit, like, you finished the single year grid. And I just got so stoked, you know. I was just like, man, like, that's fucking awesome that, you know, that I was able to pull that off, especially after so, you know, just not knowing for so long. So, you know, this is something I'm not gonna force. I mean, it's only been 2 weeks. It's only 2 weeks post trip. I'm slowly getting my energy back. I'm slowly getting back on the professional grind. Trying to start looking at all of the media that I collected over the course of this project, and just getting back to a little bit more of a predictable way of life. Even if only for the short term.
For sure.
Because of course, there will be many, many other projects.
Of course.
Yeah.
Trust me, we're going to get to that.
Yes, yes.
Dude, I'm going to take time out for a second. So
okay.
You have zero obligation to do this, but what is your schedule looking like for the next, 45 minutes?
Pretty chill, man.
There's, so much more here, dude. And,
Dude, let's keep going, man.
I feel like we could, turn this into 2 episodes.
Homie, let's do it right. Let's do it right. It feels like the conversation's flowing. I don't feel like I'm running out of shit to say.
No, I'm really just trying to kind of step back and let you get this all out there, because that's what people want to hear, man. That's what people want to hear. So, all right. So Philip and I just came to the conclusion that we're actually going to turn this into 2 episodes, because we are, more than an hour in at this point, and I still have so much stuff to get to that I feel like rather than just cutting that off and then revisiting it in a month or 2, no, fuck that. We need 2 back-to-back episodes. So I think that's what we're going to do. So
let's do it.
We're going to cap this one here, everybody. Thank you so much for listening, and be sure to tune in next week. I've never done this before, so this feels weird, but be sure to tune in next week to hear the rest of this conversation. We're going to talk a little bit more about just kind of the overall process of the grid. We're going to get to some Instagram submitted questions as well. We're going to talk a little bit about social media, and now that we've kind of gotten the story of that last part of the single year grid out there, we're going to kind of reflect a little bit more. So thank you so much for listening, Philip, dude. Thank you so much. We're going to keep it going here, but to everybody listening, have a good one.